Hi everyone, this is Vikas Arora, your podcast host. So welcome to yet another episode of EliteCISOs weekly power podcast, where we bring CISOs from the industry and talk about different subjects from IT security domain. So this week we have Mohit Gupta from Motherson's Group. He's the Chief Information Security Officer at Motherson's. And this week we are going to talk about a very interesting topic, which is ransomware. So Mohit is going to talk about his experience with overall ransomware, how it impacted their organization. So as we start, usually I'll ask Mohit to introduce yourself, and then we'll talk about your experience with ransomware. Yeah, Mohit, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Vikas. So I'm Mohit Gupta, has been working in the industry for about 18 years now in various strategic and leadership roles, primarily in information cybersecurity. I'm master's in cyber law and cybersecurity by qualification and has authored a book on quality management system, and now security is in pipeline. So I'm a little fond of writing.
Nice.
I'm currently working as CISO in Mind, a Motherson Group of company, and also operating as a group CISO for Motherson Group of companies.
Wonderful.
So
Wonderful. Yeah. So let's directly dive into your experience with ransomware. So help us understand what was the context, how did you figure it out? So initial high level details.
Sure. So just to give you a little perspective of the magnitude of this massive ransomware attack that we experienced a couple of years ago, and then we had to manage. Let me talk about the size of operations of this company first. It was obviously the company that we were supporting, and we had been managing their IT operations for many years now, more than a decade already. So the company had this operations in 14 countries where Mind was managing their primarily IT operations and all sort of IT infrastructure in collaboration with the local IT teams. But then there were smaller parties also involved who were taking care of few services, say ERP server in some location or some application server in some countries. So that was the state. And so couple of years ago when we received this help desk, so I'm jumping on to how exactly we discovered. So so this ticket came at help desk stating the fact that one of the user in their US operations observed some weird file extension on his system, and he wasn't able to access obviously all his files. So the service desk, as normal, obviously reported back that, okay, could you please provide us more specific information, the file extension names and the screenshot and relevant information.
Right.
So in the meanwhile, while service desk responded, they realized that there were more tickets around of same nature, and fortunately one had screenshot. So since they are trained, they immediately realized that there is something which is wrong and raised an alarm. So I got a call in the night, and then everyone else in context were informed.
Right.
And immediately in a short span of time, we realized that it was 2,000 systems all across their group locations, including servers that got encrypted.
Wow. So this was not Motherson's itself. It was one of the clients that got impacted, right?
So the way I'm explaining out here is Mind is one company, while Motherson has more than 100 odd companies. So we in turn also treat each company as our customer, but then there are external customers as well. So I'm talking of one of the customer of Mind.
Right. And this always happens in night, right? So middle of the night, you will get a call that there is a ransomware. Great. So what was the first reaction, right? Even more than that, how did you manage the stakeholders? Because if ransomware is there, before you technically address it, you have to manage the entire the incident response plan chain, right? To keep your management informed and all. So walk us through what was initial reaction, and then what did you do after that?
So I get that the reaction is always standard that, oh, a ransomware attack, get everyone on team, onboarded. So, but I get that we as a security community are pretty used to. I am a little unfortunate, a little more, because I also take care of 24/7 service desk operations for the service management piece in my organization. So that way I keep on receiving these midnight phone calls. So that way, but I guess that for security community, it's pretty normal. it certainly was scary when we realized that it was 2000 systems all across, and it wasn't obviously immediately that we realized that it is all systems all across.
Right.
The information obviously made this dark night even darker. So some of the initial emergency response other than the business stakeholders, because see, uh, it is not the real workload or the actions that gives you stress. It is the panic in stakeholders, be it at
True.
business side, be it at internal team side, that creates that panic, which gives you stress. So obviously,
Absolutely.
here the communication becomes very important. Stakeholder management
Mhm.
becomes very, very important.
Mhm.
But all said and done, initial emergency response actions were very, very important.
Mhm.
And if I start to talk about few of those immediate ones, few become too standard, few were too specific, because see, in IT, these attacks are inevitable, and we know that the sophistication and the modus operandi of these attackers is getting sophisticated with each day passing by.
Right.
There are many in parallel steps that an enterprise need to perform when such a massive ransomware attack happens. Um, to activate your security core teams, bring them on board, comes onto the bridge call, start to talk with multiple stakeholders onto
Mhm.
the same bridge call, try to assess the initial known impact that you can figure out, and then quickly decide that what are those quick immediate containment steps so that it doesn't propagate into the environment. So you obviously need to isolate that infected machine, and I'm being repetitive in saying that these known machines. So every time you discover a new machine, you need to isolate that. But then in
Mhm.
parallel, you need to activate your network team to make sure that the isolation of that particular unit or a plant
Mhm.
or that specific region or a country. So depending on what you know, so the overall
Right.
impact, you tend to isolate that so that it doesn't propagate in the rest of the environment. Rest of the environment remains safe. You obviously need to identify the relevant servers which are safe, and then isolate them from the local network. So WAN level separation, LAN level separation, a lot of in parallel steps that
Right.
happens. Another important step into the same is protecting your backups, because backups are the only rescue can
Absolutely.
rescue out of this
True.
ransomware attacks. So
True.
you obviously have to have those strategies which start to protect your backup. Stop any scheduler if at all there is a
Mhm.
scheduler which is scheduled. And in 24 by 7 sort of environment, when the geography spread is say from Australia to US, you obviously need to figure out that where are the schedulers. Otherwise the encrypted files gets replicated into the backup and then probably replace it. If you do not have
Right.
those retention policies right, and you obviously end up getting those backup failures also, or the encrypted
Right.
files getting passed on.
Right. Right.
So ideas do not allow those panics to be created when you manage these stakeholders, and then ensure
Mhm.
that various teams are formed and in parallel steps
Mhm.
are being identified, and
Right.
let those
Right.
teams do this micromanagement.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, do you already have some playbook defined in terms of, okay, when a ransomware comes, this all needs to be done because it can come anytime. And then when it comes, then we start to plan, it becomes very difficult. So, you already have a process or a mind map already available that, okay, this is what needs to be done. Legal has to be informed, management has to be informed. Was it already there? Share some insights around that, please.
Sure. So important thing out here is that irrespective what you do, how much you plan, your planning
Right.
always comes
True.
short. So
True.
you need to be agile enough to take
Mhm.
those immediate decisions. Irrespective
Right.
of how much you plan, you end up failing on those at times. So certainly we had plans. We tried to capture anything and everything that could happen with different attack scenarios.
Mhm.
Fortunately, we had been doing these simulation exercises, because you really can't replicate the similar stuff
True.
in the live environment. So you obviously end up doing these simulation or walkthrough sort of testings on periodic basis, making sure that the collaboration and communication is very, very strong, because that survives, that gives you that survival during
Right.
such times. So obviously we had those playbooks and those recovery
Right.
steps laid down. But
Makes
as
sense.
as
Makes
I
sense.
said,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
So as I said that uh, not only that these playbooks were there, but I guess more important is
Mhm.
how do we manage the high availability requirements when they are there. I always say
Right.
that fortunately it was a weekend, and that's how
Yeah.
we started.
True, true,
So
true.
internally also we keep on talking about that.
Right,
Fortunately, it was a weekend. It was 48 hours that took us to recover all critical systems, as we
right,
qualify that as crown jewels for us,
right,
all across these 14 countries. But
right.
uh, in automotive, I guess that things are even more complex, especially when we talk about the availability requirements. Like for instance,
True.
in not just in automotive, but I say
Mhm,
in manufacturing, there are
mhm,
requirements like JIT and JIS,
mhm,
just in time and just in sequence. So
mhm,
just in time is like you receive a request of delivery. So
mhm.
you need to have either the enough raw material capacity in your warehouse so that you are able to produce. So the cycle time should be well aligned. This is how request keeps on coming.
Right.
And otherwise you have to have ready-made stock,
Mhm.
and then the stock inventory management becomes very important.
Right.
Another is just in sequence, wherein you need to deliver those parts at customer assembly line. Like for instance, if a car is getting
Right.
manufactured
Mhm.
and there is an assembly line, so you need to deliver blue color, say a bumper on their
Right.
assembly line in sequence. So
Right.
a blue color and then white color and then red color, the way the sequence has.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
complexity becomes even more complex in such
Absolutely.
an.
Absolutely. It's a very typical situation because on one side you are recovering from the attack, and then you have to ensure that production does not suffer. Your client commitments are there, and the deliveries are met. So talking about the initial stakeholder management to now recovery, right? How did you recover from this massive attack, if I may say, because 2000 system is and recovering over a weekend, it's a challenge in itself, right? So what were your
Exactly.
strategies recovering from it?
Sure. I guess uh, it was even more challenging when you start to involve global stakeholders, especially even in your IT teams who are governed by you.
Right.
In India and in overseas, there is a mindset difference. So in India, even if you call in midnight, people tend to realize that there is an emotional
Right.
connect, and then you need to be onboarded. But when it comes to overseas, you need to be very sensitive about
Mhm.
their non-working hours and things like that.
Right.
And then they also reside at remote places wherein it takes
Mhm.
time for them to reach. Not everyone has access to direct access to systems. So obviously
Right.
things become even more complex. But well, coming on to the details of recovery. So as I said, that we formed and activated various teams,
Mhm.
delegated the actions based on the team and work types. So we activated based on how we decided upon in the initial playbook sets that what would going to happen if such a massive attack happens. But on the runtime, following the agility, we allowed their leads to do this micromanagement, since there were a
Mhm.
lot of things which were happening in parallel, and doing this micromanagement at a core security level would have been a nightmare. So obviously we had to
Mhm.
delegate that, making sure that we trust those leaders who do this micromanagement within their work areas, and keep on updating the
Right.
core collaboration team.
Mhm.
So initially we were getting these updates every 30 minutes,
Mhm.
and as time passes by, as we start to find some comfort, we increase the frequency updates to 60 minutes, and then
Mhm.
it went up to 2 hours when things were much under control.
Right.
I guess it is worth mentioning that whenever such a ransomware attack happens, and that too at a large scale, and you rightly touched upon this
Mhm.
aspect that we also need to inform relevant legal agencies
Right.
and various other agencies, including your customers as well. So stakeholders are not limited to the internal stakeholders; it is also external. And there are insurance
True.
parties. You need to involve legal, and then your say company legal get in touch with corporate legal, and then the other aspects start to peep in. So in our case, there were many, since it was global attack, so there were a lot of agencies
Right.
who were involved. Like for instance, US CERT in US, and in few circumstances you also need to inform FBI if at all you believe that there are IPR intrusions
True. True.
or breaches that has happened. In India, you have Indian CERT. Uh, I'm unsure how many people know that there is a section 70 of IT Act under which rules 12 of CERT imposes an obligation for an enterprise to mandatorily inform CERT about
Right.
such attacks,
Absolutely.
and there is a list obviously which is given. So
True.
But then again, these complexities varies, these requirement varies from country to country and state to state also. Like for instance, in
Absolutely.
US also. So one need to be very aware about these obligations, incorporate that into your playbooks. So while we were doing this, it was equally important for us to engage a forensic partner. And I guess that it was equally a stress point for us,
Right.
because in our case there were too many
Mhm.
initially, but then ended up choosing only two forensic partners, one in US and one in India.
Right.
Since the head office of this company, or rather the senior management of this company, were there in US, and Mind, being IT management service provider, had their own trusted service
Right.
provider in India, and
True.
both of these forensic partners were pushing us. One had a different
Yeah.
strategy, obviously,
Right. Right.
wherein one said that okay, hold on everything and then make sure that we do the initial forensic and then only you
Right.
start,
Right.
or you touch the rest of the systems. While
Mhm.
in India, our trusted partner gave us comfort with their very specific planning, and we all respect those stakeholders who comes on board, be it OEMs and partners. So
Right.
we took this decision, obviously, not to pay ransom, and it was too a obvious choice. So we never do so,
Absolutely.
irrespective whether it is one or it is many, and we always rely upon our backup and recovery strategy. So that's what
Right.
we did, and we chose one partner over another.
Mhm.
Uh, and I could go on
Yeah.
stress points that could happen.
Yeah.
Uh,
True. But I think very
which is
valid point is do not pay the ransom, right? That is the message which has to go in the industry. I mean, there could be different situations, but ideally, if possible, do not ever pay the ransom because they will come back again if you pay them, right?
true. That is that
Yeah.
you're giving the motivation for them to come back suddenly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it is not assured, not guaranteed. There are statistics which say that not even 10% get the
True.
right key.
Absolutely.
So the
Absolutely.
probability of getting the right key is also very minuscule.
Very tough. Yeah, that's true. So again, talking about recovery, so you relied on the backup itself, right? So luckily, touchwood, your backup was safe, and you were able to restore from the backup, right? But again,
Unfortunately not.
oh, okay, okay.
Unfortunately not.
Yeah. Then how did you
There
recover?
was so that is where I was touching that there were many stress points, and when I recall those days, it becomes too scary.
Right.
Even our backup catalog was also encrypted.
Oh
So
boy.
the overall
Yeah.
delivery, overall
Right.
recovery, that became very challenging. So we obviously
Wow.
had to rebuild the backup catalog, obviously by using those specific techniques that our people are trained on.
Right.
So we sort of recovered those backup catalogs in most of the countries, and that's where we started to rely
Okay.
upon that backup after doing the necessary testing.
Right. So you were able to recover the catalog, and then from catalog you were able to restore, right?
Yes.
Okay. And did you have to reinstall the operating systems on all those 2000 endpoints, or that you were able to survive those endpoints?
See, frankly, so obviously there are OS images with all the relevant patch updations, relevant programs, and things like that. So we have those images ready,
Mhm.
and as a part of strategy, we obviously were prepared. And I guess that only that strategy that was there, and that plan that we tested many a times, gave us enough comfort that we can always rely upon the recovery, as a plan, as a next step.
Right. Right.
So uh, it is not just the endpoints. There were servers. There were many
Right.
other application servers, database
Mhm.
servers, which
Mhm.
had encryptions. Fortunately, our ERP wasn't encrypted. It wasn't
Right.
impacted because it was all Linux. So it was a Windows-based ransomware attack. So obviously,
Okay.
had impacted Windows. So what we did is that we classified all these assets which were encrypted into three different buckets.
Mhm.
One was obviously which required multiple stakeholders to be onboarded, like for instance, application people, database people, business side people, because
Mhm.
they had to do some sort of UAT. We
Right.
obviously had to rely on the paperwork which was there on site, and to see that the sequence of, say, for instance, one of the business processes invoicing. So the sequence of invoicing doesn't disrupt. So we had to have that buffer in place in between, and then
Right.
formulate the recovery strategy as to
Mhm.
what would be the next invoicing number when we're going to start the operations using that application server.
Right. Right.
So
Makes
similarly,
sense.
One was the application server, database server to all these stakeholders. Another were all the infrastructure people and then the local IT. And the third stage was the endpoints. And
Right.
endpoints were obviously in sequence, so few were simply formatted and they were given, this task was given to the central team. So again, we collaborated in such a way wherein we distributed the work among the local IT teams, the central IT teams within
Right.
the central IT teams. That there were different teams which were formed on. We also have a buffer team which we use at times, which we pull in from the projects, and then we deploy in these recovery. So that is how we
Makes sense.
augment these resources
Right.
which are available.
Right, right. Now, before we get to the last question, talking about your suggestions to the industry, let me ask this. Did you change anything? I mean, from a process perspective, from a technology perspective, was anything changed so that, you don't fall for this ransomware attack again?
See, since those times, and if we talk about today, it's been more than 3 years now.
Mhm.
I guess that the lot has changed. Lot has changed, and a lot has to change even further.
Right. Mhm.
Whenever I've been asked that what's your strategy for next 5 years in the board meeting, and I always say that security is evolving field. Just
Right.
ask me about 1 year and maximum 2 years.
True.
Don't ask me about 5 years because things
Yeah,
would going to rapidly change.
absolutely.
So and that's where we always say that every 2 years
Mhm.
uh, CISO has to be on the toe every year to review its
Right.
strategy to see that
Right.
what new needs to be adopted, what are the new risks that has emerged, how things have evolved, how technology has evolved, and then
Mhm.
accordingly plan the budget so that after
Right.
2 years you have something to adopt. And
True.
even if you don't adopt, you have enough open sources, freewares, so that you can leverage those and
Mhm.
be creative in deploying those processes and technological
Right.
controls. So certainly a
Right.
lot has changed.
Makes
So
sense.
those times we started to use open source platforms.
Mhm.
We have enhanced our security
Mhm.
our threat intel platform
Mhm.
to a level wherein we started to feed in lot many feeds from industry and things like that. So
Right.
there are
Makes
many
sense.
technological changes that has done.
Right, makes sense. And were you able to identify the patient zero in terms of was it a phishing kind of attack that somebody clicked on a link and downloaded malware or something else?
Okay, that was interesting. I guess that one of the important point that or one of the important step that any security team does is they try and understand the ransomware family, that what family it belongs to, and that's how you narrow down to your strategy of handling that
Right,
ransomware. So we obviously did the same. We identified that it belonged to us, a ransomware family named Samas.
mhm,
And interestingly, all those people who know this family, Samas family, they obviously tend to know that okay, it is associated with one kind of a database server.
mhm.
So we started to figure out that where exactly this database server is, because unfortunately we couldn't find that into our immediate inventory that was there, which was managed by us. And that's where we realized that it was, and obviously since we had this bridge call, we had these stakeholders onboarded, we sort of asked this question with all. And then after 30 odd minutes we realized that it is one of the server at one of the Germany location which was managed by a third party,
Right,
and had this JBoss server which had this legacy
right,
uh,
right, right,
uh, server operating in. So we
right,
certainly were able to figure out, just because we went
right.
systematically and we
Wow,
identified that
very nice,
zero machine.
very nice.
Otherwise
Yeah,
it takes
yeah, because
about 500,000 dollars to be able to do this overall scan and find out
absolutely.
the zero.
Absolutely.
So
Because most of the time people go back to, okay, somebody would have clicked on a phishing link, but I really appreciate you were able to narrow down in terms of what was the patient zero, right? And finding a JBoss in Germany, wow, phenomenal. Great, great. So since we want to keep this podcast short, let's come to the last question, the most important one. What are your suggestions for the peer CISOs and industry in terms of what they can do to defend themselves from this ever increasing ransomware?
well, I guess I already said that threats and attacks are inevitable. The sophistication is getting increased every day. Gone are the days when we used to think about, let's say, years, months. Now it is not even days, it is about hours and minutes. So that's the
Absolutely.
speed that we expect. So the targeted I always say that the targeted tech, if at all someone targets an enterprise,
Mhm.
it is likely that it would going to happen, and he would going to get that success. So
True,
you have
true.
to be up all the times. So no matter how you prepare, runtime adjustments and quick decisions are very very important. And I guess that that is what would going to drive few of my suggestions. And I'll not going to talk about the technology. I could talk about
Right.
SOC, SIM, SOAR, and all sort of technology, EDRs, and things like that. But more than technology, it is very important that uh, based on my experience, I give certain tips.
Mhm.
I give certain tips which I guess would going to make a difference in the way
Mhm.
we are dealing these emergency responses.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess that the very first thing that I'm going to start is have your cyber emergency plan in place. There
Mhm.
should not be any excuse of not having it. There are a
True.
lot of people who say that no, I know that there are only 4 or 5, and then I download it, I refer it from,
Mhm.
I gain it from some of my colleague, industry
Right,
colleague,
right.
and so on and so forth, and then say that
True,
always claim that no, I have it. But that's not the case. There shouldn't be
true.
any excuse that I just copied and pasted. It
Mhm.
should be relevant to your own organization,
Mhm.
and make sure that it is very much in sync to your BCP or disaster recovery plans that are there, because there are a lot
True.
of overlapping, and you would end up failing on those attack scenarios when it
Mhm.
comes in real. So
Mhm.
and otherwise also it leads to a lot of duplication and
Mhm.
increases the overall effort of recovery.
Right.
And your team would obviously going to get confused. So prepare for the worst case scenarios.
Mhm.
Have all those possible attacks
Mhm.
that you believe are relevant to your enterprise. Do your
Mhm.
uh, peer brainstorming among stakeholders. The second is remain alert and agile to the situation in that very situation when it
Right.
happens, because as we say that there is nothing standard or static. There is no single attack which is similar to the previous one.
Previous attack. Yeah.
So they are evolving. You also need to evolve. You need to be agile, because you need to take those quick decisions
Mhm.
in that agility form.
Mhm.
Remain alert to what is happening.
Mhm.
Assess the risk quickly, with
Right.
whatever information that's flowing in to make sure that you enable quick decisions. Either you are taking it or someone else is taking it in relevant situation.
Right.
Uh, and equally important is that you have your collaboration running, so
Mhm.
that you don't consume too much time in building consensus.
Mhm.
So make sure that your collaboration keep on running, and then you
Mhm.
take those faster decisions whenever a need be.
Makes sense.
Um,
Makes sense.
I guess equally important, and I'm going to touch upon very very few things which
Mhm.
probably would going to enlighten many. Um, Communication collaboration is much talked about, and I guess that in our case also it worked
Mhm.
fantastically very well, and those were few of those things that
Mhm.
gave enough comfort for business people to rely upon, as to what we are doing, giving them comfort in terms of what is happening, what is not, in how much time would we be able to recover, um, uh, is
Right.
everything going all right, or does it
Mhm.
require any escalation.
True. True.
Do your supplier risk assessment very very carefully. I just
Mhm.
told you that
Yeah.
in order to be able to identify that
Yeah.
very machine which
Yeah.
wasn't there in our asset inventory. So
Right.
be aware of all those unknowns that are there in your environment, and for that I
True.
guess equally important is focus on your work group machines, focus upon your
Mhm.
supplier risk assessment exercise, and with
Mhm.
periodic testing of your plans, do involve your OEMs and suppliers
Mhm.
and partners into your testing, so that you know that whenever you need support, even if it is midnight for someone, you have an assured uh,
Right.
support available whenever it is
Absolutely.
important.
Absolutely. Yeah, very, very valid points because most of the people they talk about the technical stuff. You deploy EDR, you deploy SIM to detect and all, but yeah, very relevant point in terms of communication and collaboration because that's very important and will save you when it comes to the ransomware or any kind of disaster. For that example, yeah, great. I think that's all I wanted to ask. So great insights. I'm sure people will benefit from it and they can plan because ransomware is going to come, right? It's out there. It is going to bite you. So your insights will really help people to plan well, right? So thanks a lot. Appreciate you getting on this podcast and sharing your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vikas.